Okay, it's a great pleasure to introduce Martha Evans from the Anti-Bullying Alliance. Martha, would you like to tell us about the Anti-Bullying Alliance and the work that you do?
So yes, I'm Martha. I'm from the Anti-Bullying Alliance. I'm the director of the Anti-Bullying Alliance. Let me share my screen and I can share a slide which outlines what we do and how we work. So we're based at the National Children's Bureau, which is a children's charity, a national children's charity, works across the UK, and we work across three different areas. Our mission is to try and reduce bullying of all children and young people and improve the way that adults respond to bullying by uniting and bringing everybody together against bullying. We do things like campaigns. So we run a campaign called Anti-Bullying Week, which takes place in November every year and also includes Odd Socks Day. So we've got another sock theme as part of the Anti-Bullying Week campaign. We work with professionals, so anybody working with children and young people, to try and improve the way that they work with children and young people around bullying. And then we try and work with government to change the law and guidance relating to government policy relating to bullying. And to do that, we work with young people, we work across our membership, and we don't do anything without looking at research and evidence as well. And so in the session tonight, we're just going to look at it looks like a lot, but there's a short amount of slides on each one. We're going to look at what the impact of bullying is, what bullying actually is, the signs a child might be bullied, and who's at risk of being bullied, if there's anybody more at risk than others, what the law says about bullying, and supporting your child if they're being bullied, if your child is bullying others, and finally working with your child's school. Does that sound all good to everybody? Yeah. So all of this applies to children and young people, but I realise that some of you might have older children. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can or find any advice or information that you need after the session. But to start with, I'm going to do a short quiz with you. I've got 3 questions that I'm going to put into the chat. So the first question here, I'll read them out to you as well, just in case you can't see the chat. So question number 1, what percentage of young people surveyed in the last academic year, so in the last year of school, said that they had been bullied? Was it 24%, 30% of young people, or 31% of young people? You can write back in the chat, or you can just think it in your head, whatever you prefer. Catherine says 31, we've got 2 31%. Joe, do you want to have a guess? Okay, we've got Gillian's response. So the correct answer on this one is that it's actually 24%. So it's about a quarter, 1 in 4 of all young people experienced bullying in the previous year alone. When you look at children with special educational needs or disability, which most children with Down syndrome would fit under, that number goes up to about 31%. So we have an increase in terms of children with SEN disability quite significantly. Okay, so that's question number 1. Question number 2, you're doing well so far. So the question number 2 is 16,000 11 to 15-year-olds are absent from school at any one time due to experiencing bullying. That's the answer to whether that's true or false. So let me know if you think that it's true that 16,000 11 to 15-year-olds are absent at school so not at school due to bullying. 2 trues. Joe thinks it's true. Just waiting for you, Gillian. True. Wow, that's a full house. Everybody was right. That one's true. So we're missing a lot of school days because of experiences of bullying, and that's a significant amount. And that's when the reason for a child not being at school was primarily, so the main reason that they weren't at school was because of bullying. When it looks at being a reason that contributes, but not the main reason, it went to over 70,000 children every day. So we're talking about a lot of children missing education every day due to bullying and their experiences there. Right, so final question in this section is, so this question is, it's actually question number 3, what percentage of children experiencing bullying never tell anybody about it? So is it 15%, 21%, 3% or 29%? We've got 121, we've got 29, 21 and 15. So we've got a range of answers. The correct answer there is 21%. So we know about 1 in 5 children. So yeah, 1 in 5 children do not tell us that they're being bullied at all. And that's a really big problem because they carry that with them as well. So let me go back to my presentation now. We've looked at some of the facts about bullying, and we'll have another quiz in a bit. But I wanted to talk to you about the impact of bullying and what research shows us happens to children who experience bullying. Now, it's just a reminder that this doesn't happen to everybody that experiences bullying, but children who experience bullying are more likely to face barriers to learning. So it's very hard to learn if you're experiencing bullying. You're more likely to miss school, more likely to be excluded from school, like more likely to retaliate, so to fight back, which can get you into trouble sometimes, or it might put you in danger. Does place a strain on families and parents and carers. You can have impaired well-being, so you can feel a range of sadness, mental health issues, and up to self-harm and experiences of depression as well for children. But research shows that there's a long-term impact of experiencing bullying as well. So adults who've experienced bullying are more likely to earn less money. They're more likely to achieve fewer academic qualifications. They get less qualifications when they go to school after they finish school. They're more likely to not be in a stable relationship, more likely to be obese, so to be overweight, and then to experience a range of mental health issues as adults as well, and more likely to perpetrate or to be a victim of domestic violence and to be homeless. So we know sometimes you'll hear schools say, not so much anymore, but we certainly did 10 years ago hear schools say it's kind of part of what you should experience at school, it's part of learning. But actually we know that for a child who experiences bullying, those experiences can have a really long-term impact. So to make sure that we have a good understanding of how to stop bullying, it's really important that we know what we mean when we talk about bullying and how we can work out the difference between bullying and a falling out, for example, having an argument with your friends. So we have a shared definition at the Anti-Bullying Alliance, which is our definition of bullying. And I'm going to share it with you now. It looks long, but actually there's some ways of breaking it down. So at the Anti-Bullying Alliance, we believe that bullying is the repetitive, intentional hurting of one person or group by another person or group where the relationship involves an imbalance of power. It can be physical, verbal or psychological, and it can happen face-to-face or online. So it can happen in real life, or it can happen on your phones, for example. So our definition has 4 key elements. And so the important things to remember are that it's not a one-off incident. It doesn't happen just once. It doesn't mean that something that's unkind isn't important when it happens once, but it just doesn't count as bullying. So it's repeated, it happens a lot. It hurts. It's intentional, so somebody means to do it. There's a meaning to do it. There's somebody who did it on purpose. And finally, there's an imbalance of power, so a power imbalance. And we'll talk a bit more about what we mean by somebody who may have more power over somebody else on the next slide. So if you look at this example here, you can see 2 children. One person says something unkind and the other person says something unkind back. Now, when that happens, there's not necessarily an imbalance of power. We can have an argument with each other, and it's actually really important that we allow all children to try and navigate having an argument, because there's a lot that can be learned from that. So children often need some support around understanding what an argument is, what it isn't, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an imbalance of power. But the balance of power can change and shift relatively quickly. So if you see in this example, the next example, there's somebody throws an insult, keep saying the insult, and the other young person says to stop it. Now you can see that there is an imbalance of power here because it's repeated and the other person has said stop. And as soon as somebody says stop and that continues, the power has shifted. So somebody has more power over you because they haven't stopped. And in this last example, you can see how there's a clear imbalance of power here, because somebody's spreading a rumor, they're saying lots of insults, they're getting other people to join in, and the other person who's experiencing it is saying, stop it again. So there's lots of ways you can have an imbalance of power. You can have an imbalance of power because you're the minority group. It might be that you're the minority faith or race. You might be smaller than everybody else. You might be bigger than other people. You might be older. You might have a difficulty in understanding. You might have a learning disability, for example, a learning difficulty, which means that children might try to do things like false friendships, which we see happen often with children with learning disabilities, where somebody might pretend to be your friend and not actually mean it. So there's lots of ways that you can have power over somebody. But if we look at these examples here about whether or not something is bullying, I'm just going to talk you through these 3 examples and test them against the 4 elements of the definition of bullying. So if you take the first one, Jake spits into a can of cola and says he will make Ade drink it. So if we think about whether or not this is bullying, first of all, is it repetitive? This one doesn't look like it's a repetitive incident, but we don't know because it would be quite a random thing to happen without context. But it doesn't look like it's bullying, it's repetitive. It's certainly hurtful. There's clear intent because Jake says he will make Ade drink it, so there's intention. And there's a power imbalance again because there's a threat when he says he'll make Ade drink it. So with this first example, you can see how you might need more information to decide whether or not it's repetitive. In the next scenario, you can see Abdul has autism and gets anxious about the rain when in the playground. Other pupils and a member of lunchtime staff often tell him they can feel the rain to wind him up. So in this example, what's happening to Abdul is happening more than once. So it's repetitive, so it meets that criteria. It's hurtful because they know it's going to upset Abdul because he gets anxious. It's intentional because they know that it hurts Abdul. And there's a power imbalance, and there's a power imbalance for a number of reasons. One is because there's lots of pupils there, so there's more than one person. There's a power imbalance because they're using symptoms of his autism to try and upset him. And it's also a power imbalance because there's a member of staff who's doing it, and that person has power over Abdul. So in this scenario, you'd think that it's pretty clear that it would be a bullying example. And then in our final example, each time Grace walks into a room and a group of other children giggle and whisper to each other. So in this scenario, we can say each time, so it sounds like it's repetitive. It seems like it's hurtful to Grace because she's coming to tell you about it, so it seems like it's hurtful. But where there's a question mark is about whether or not it's intentional. So it could be that those children are giggling to try and upset Grace or whispering and talking about Grace, but it could also be that Grace is a bit paranoid, she's a bit worried about why they're giggling and actually they're laughing about something else, but Grace is just being a bit worried about that. And there's a power imbalance because there's more than one of them. So with this scenario, you think that you probably need more information because you don't know whether it could or couldn't be bullying. So you can see by going through these kinds of examples, you can start to unpick what we mean by bullying. And in each of these scenarios, if you went to talk to your child's school about each of these scenarios, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't, just because they decide something isn't bullying, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be doing anything about it. So for example, in Jake's scenario, just because somebody might decide that it's not bullying, it doesn't mean it's okay for Jake to do that. And it doesn't mean that you wouldn't be looking out for, just in case it turns into bullying, for example. So does anybody, before, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen to see if anybody has any questions or anything before we move on. No? Okay, great. Right, so we've looked at what we mean, the definition of bullying. Spotting the signs of bullying, so looking out for when your child may or may not be bullied. So there are some things to look out for, and these are the things to look out for in relation to school. So the first one, being unwilling to go to school, frightened on the school journey, or suddenly leaving home earlier, later, or changing your route to school. So really being scared of going to school. Suddenly declining in progress or achievements, so suddenly not doing as well at school than any other time. Changes in behaviour, withdrawing, lashing out, arguing with siblings where that wasn't happening before, things like bedwetting, things like that that might indicate that a child might be being bullied. Not wanting to go to certain lessons or certain times of the day, so it might be avoiding PE lessons or avoiding one journey home or one taxi home or whatever it would be. And finally, becoming ill, headaches, sickness, unexplained tummy aches, things like that. And when there's trends where it's certain times of the day, whether it's a Sunday evening or certain points in the day, you're getting calls from school to say to come and pick your child up. When it comes to being at home, if possessions are being torn or clothing missing or things going missing, that could be a sign. Difficulty sleeping, nightmares can often be a sign of experiencing bullying. Unexplained injuries, bruises, scratches and cuts could be a sign of a child experiencing bullying. Money going missing, becoming angry or lashing out at family for no obvious reasons. Often when a child is experiencing bullying, they tend to take out their anger on the people that they're closest to. And so you can sometimes see people lashing out for no reason. And then finally, withdrawing from family and things that they've previously enjoyed doing. So suddenly not taking as much interest in a film that they really enjoyed, or going to see grandma at the weekend, those kinds of things. And when it comes to online bullying, some signs that there might be a problem with bullying are avoiding discussions about what you're doing online and who you're talking to, so being quite suddenly secretive about the PlayStation or secretive on the phone or iPad. Stopping using their electronic devices suddenly not being interested in playing on that game, Roblox or whatever it is. Seeming nervous or jumpy when on devices, or becoming really obsessive. So one sign would be to be going away from your devices, and then another sign would be feeling very obsessed about needing to be near your device and being worried about what there might be on that device. So those are some of the signs that a child might be being bullied, but you know your child best. And so really a lot of these could be signs of lots of things, so don't panic, but it's you know your child best, and any of those changes could indicate bullying. So it's important to think about how you could talk to your child about that. And so, as I said at the start, we could see that disabled children and children with special educational needs are more likely to experience bullying. And we know that makes up quite a large percentage of the population. So you're talking about 20% of children have some form of special educational needs or disability. When you look into those groups, there's not a huge amount of evidence that relates specifically to Down syndrome. The last good data that we had, the last survey that we had around just learning disability was from MENCAP, and it was quite a long time ago. I think it was about 2010, but it did find that 8 in 10 children were saying with learning disabilities were saying that they were experiencing bullying. So what we tend to find is children with physical disabilities has a very small difference in terms of how much bullying they experience. But children with learning disabilities much more likely to experience bullying, unfortunately, than others. But we have lots of resources on our website, and we do a lot of work around the social model of disability, and we work with schools about how we can address that, and we've got lots of tools on our website, so do keep an eye out on that. But let me just quickly go through these. There are some other groups that are more likely to experience bullying. So you've got experiences of sexual and sexist bullying, children who are lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender, or who might appear to be or perceived to be by other children, are more likely to experience bullying. Some race and faith groups are more likely to experience bullying. Children are often bullied about appearance-related things, things to do with how they look, and we've just released some free online training for school staff about that. And then finally, we've got 3 other groups of children who are more likely to experience bullying than others, including children who are in receipt of free school meals, young carers, so children who care for other people in their family and looked after children, or children who've been in care, are more likely to experience bullying. But what it's really important to remember when thinking about who's more likely to experience bullying is that there are individual characteristics that might make children more likely to experience bullying. So individual things about a person that might make them more likely to experience bullying, such as finding it difficult to make friendships, moving schools, being quite shy. Those are some individual characteristics. But there are also things to do with your relationships and how other children are with you. And then finally, the things that schools do and the community does, which makes a child more likely to experience bullying. But what's really important to remember is that it's never a child's fault that they're experiencing bullying, and it's never about something that they inherently are. It's about attitudes towards those children. So I hope you're all still with me. We're talking now about bullying and the law. So I've got 3 more questions for you to answer in the chat. So this is bullying and the law quiz. So the first question is, let me know if you think it's true or false that bullying is a criminal offence. So something that's against the law. Got 1 true. So I'm not sure. We've got 2 falses. So that answer is false. But Joe, you're not actually wrong, because what it is that some types of bullying might be a criminal offence. So it might be that if somebody physically hurts you or hits you, that would be against the law. But it's just not that a criminal offence of bullying. So you could have criminal offences like about how you text people on the phone. That's called malicious communications. So there's different pieces of law that could apply in bullying scenarios, but the majority of instances of bullying don't constitute a criminal offence alone. So my next question is, let me know if you think it's true or false that schools have no responsibility if bullying happens when a child is not at school. So if a child's is being bullied outside of school, they have no responsibility. Who thinks that's true or false? Falses. 1 true and 3 false. Well, that one is false, because it's a difficult one. It's actually a bit of a trick question. So schools have the powers to intervene in bullying that takes place off of school premises. So they have the ability to get involved. And what we say to schools is that if they're not getting involved in bullying that's taking place between children that are going to one school, that they need to have a pretty good reason as to why they wouldn't, and they need to record that reason. So you should I can send everybody that wants to see it and I'll tell you where it is in just a second, where that piece of law is, and you could say to schools, you have the power to intervene. So when they say we're not going to intervene, you can challenge them on that basis. Okay, final question. Who thinks it's true or false that schools have a legal duty to prevent the use of discriminatory language? So preventing the use of language that discriminates against a particular group of people, including disability. So we've got 3 truths. Kate's deciding.
The word legal has thrown me.
Do you want me to tell you?
Yeah.
That is true. You're right. So yes, it's under the Equality Act. So schools should be preventing the use of discriminatory language, and that means that they should, as it's a preventative duty, they shouldn't be waiting for somebody with Down syndrome to come in before they start working on preventing the use of discriminatory language against people with Down syndrome, for example. So they don't need to wait until they have a deaf child in their school to be working on those things. They should be thinking and anticipating, so thinking about who could come into their school and making sure they're preventing that use of discriminatory language, and that is in the Public Sector Equality Duty in the Equality Act. So that's you'll be pleased to hear that's the final quiz question. So I'm going to go back to some more on bullying and the law now. So don't worry if this is a bit confusing, because I can explain it in detail if people want me to, or we can speak about it afterwards. But when your child goes to school, you are basically acting in what they call in loco parentis. So what that means is you're agreeing to allow the school and teachers and other staff to act as parents to your child whilst they go to school. So they should be providing you a duty of care of what they call a reasonable parent. So there's lots of case law about what that means, what it means to be a reasonable parent. But when you send your child to school, they have a duty to keep your child safe, and a duty of care for your child. So these are all the pieces of law that relate to bullying. And so in the Children's Act, some types of harassment and threatening behaviour, as we talked about before, could constitute a criminal offence and should be reported to the police. So that it should be reported to the police if there's a risk of significant harm to your child, or if you think they've broken any pieces of law, like the harassment or physical violence and malicious communications, so unkind communications online. And bullying should be seen as a child protection issue if there's a reasonable cause to suspect a child might be suffering or likely to suffer significant harm as well. And so there are two pieces of law that relate to bullying and that specifically talk about bullying. The first is the Education Act 2002, and that gave schools a duty to safeguard and promote the welfare of pupils and includes bullying. So it's about promoting the welfare of pupils and including bullying. And within that, then what they did was they created the Education Inspections Act in 2006, and that gave head teachers the responsibility for preventing all forms of bullying. So head teachers have that responsibility, and what they have to do is to put down how children should be protected in terms of bullying in an anti-bullying policy. Now, sometimes that anti-bullying policy might be included in a behaviour policy, but if you don't know, you should ask your child's school for their anti-bullying policy or their behaviour policy, and that must set out all of the ways that they prevent all forms of bullying. And then there's some guidance that the Department for Education has released called Preventing and Tackling Bullying in Schools, and it's not statutory guidance, so it's not legal guidance, but it is government guidance, and schools should follow that guidance. And within that guidance, which I can send a link to anybody if they'd like to see it, but it outlines their obligations and the powers that they have to tackle bullying. It gives the teachers the responsibility of preventing all forms of bullying, and it specifically mentions disability and bullying. It says that teachers have the power to discipline pupils for misbehaving outside of school, so you can find that within that, and it's also in the Schools Inspection Act that was mentioned in the previous slide. And so you can think about whether that bullying takes place on the way to or from school, whether it be online or in the local town centre, for example. They should have the powers, and what we said before was about you can challenge them to say, if they say they're not getting involved, why they're not getting involved. And it also says that where bullying is reported to school staff, it should be investigated and acted upon. Now, unfortunately, they don't have a duty to record levels of bullying, which is something that we really want to change. In Northern Ireland, they do have that, but in England, currently they don't. So in terms of criminal law, as I've talked about, these are some of the types of legislation that you could use if you think bullying could have become a criminal offence. So you've got crime and disorder. If someone's doing something that's making another person frightened or upset, the victim can ask the police or local authority for help. And then Protection from Harassment Act, which can help if incidents of bullying have happened more than once and you feel like somebody is harassing you and not letting you kind of get on with your day-to-day life. So those are those acts. What we say to schools is that there are 3 things they can do to try and help prevent bullying, and we try and work within this kind of framework. The first is creating a respectful culture, so making sure that we have a culture of treating everybody with kindness and respect throughout the school, and schools should work hard on creating that culture and setting that as a kind of ethos. Celebrating difference in everybody, so really talking about how we can celebrate that everybody's different and not feeling like anybody's singled out within that, but celebrating things like World Down Syndrome Day, like my nephew celebrated yesterday in his primary school. And as we said, challenging discriminatory language, so challenging any language that's targeted at any particular group, and challenging that whether or not that was meant in an unkind way. So sometimes you can have disableist language that's used, historically used to discriminate against people with disabilities, and people can use it in ways of kind of joking around with their friends. However, schools should be challenging that, because if you have that language going on in schools, it can create an environment where bullying and discrimination can happen. So you should be challenging that under the Equality Act, as we talked about. So finally, I'm going to give you some tips and tools about how you can support your child if they're being bullied or if they're bullying others as well. So when you find out, when you sit down and talk to your child, so if you start to think of all those signs that a child might be being bullied, what's important to remember is to try and stay calm. It's easier said than done, but it's really important to try and allow your child to have the space to tell you and to explain in their own way about what's happened to them. You have a right to feel angry, and it's completely understandable that you feel angry, but your child may see anger, and what we hear from young people is that they see that anger and they feel like you're angry at them. So it's important to try and stay as calm as possible, tell them that it's the right thing that they've done, but don't agree to keep bullying a secret. Make sure that they know that you're going to work together to try and find out the ways forward. Encourage your child to think about a solution together. Often children are worried because what happens is you say to them, right, we're going to sort it, and we're going to go off, and I'm going to go and speak to the school, I'm going to do this. But actually it's really important to say, what would you like to happen? How do you think we can make this better? And often those things can be quite simple, but at least then children feel heard. Decide which adult they'll report to. So it might be that you want to talk to your child's teacher or teaching assistant, or maybe the head teacher or head of year. What's really important is not to encourage retaliation. Now, again, you're going to be really angry when you find out that somebody's being unkind to your child, especially when it's related to their disability, or if it's related to their disability. However, what we find is that encouraging retaliation rarely works. So saying, stick up for yourself, shout at them back, is a really difficult thing to do, especially if your confidence is damaged, or you might find it harder to communicate. So what often tends to happen is that children that retaliate get into trouble themselves, or you know, it makes the bullying worse. So it's not the best solution in that scenario. And finally, take someone with you. It's obviously a really difficult thing. So if you can, take somebody, whether it be a friend, your partner, your sister, or the information, advice and support services staff that you have in your local area. Somebody that can help just listen while you're explaining, so that you make sure that you've covered every base that you have. When you're talking to your child about ways forward, it's really important to practice strategies like walking away, asking your child to stop, working out how they're going to find their friends or teacher. So practice those strategies with your child, and think about the different ways that they could respond to those scenarios. Sometimes children find it hard in environments where there's unstructured play, so where you're just going out into the playground and there's nothing around except you know, some played material and things like that. So if there are lunchtime clubs or activities that you think your child might find gives them that structure at lunch times or in break times, it's important to think about the ways that they could do that. Lots of schools have mentoring and peer mediation or buddies, and what that really means is using other children in the school, sometimes older children, children that might be trained to support and look out for the children that are experiencing bullying. So ask your school if they have something like that, or if there are some friends that you think you could talk to and to help out. Think about the discrete signs and signals agreed with school staff about how a child can show if they're being bullied or if they're worried about something. Often it's as simple as at the end of the day finding a time to say, how's your day been, from a member of school staff, or just simply kind of an action or something like that that might be able to signal to your child's teacher that there's something that they need to follow up. And then thinking about the roles involved in bullying, we haven't got onto that actually. So where it says we've discussed earlier, I haven't put that in. But what's really important is to think about the wider group. Bullying is rarely between two individuals and nobody else is involved. So if you know that there's other children laughing along or doing things like that, it's important to not to get involved yourself, but to talk to your child's teacher about how they might want to work with other children that are in the vicinity who might be able to influence that scenario. Developing your child's confidence. So there's some ideas here about how you could work on your child's confidence. Bullying really can attack your confidence. So helping your child to think about what a good friend is. That's particularly important when you're talking with children with learning disabilities who may find it harder to know what a good friend is, or to be able to identify when somebody isn't being a good friend. So talking about the ways that a good friend makes you feel, the ways that people show themselves to be a good friend, and then perhaps suggesting where that might not be happening with their friends, and thinking about how they could make other friendships, and obviously encouraging them to be a good friend too. Role-playing those situations and scenarios. Let them know it's okay to tell an adult if they're worried, and that it's okay for them to come and talk to you. Deciding who they'll tell, and find them things sometimes out of school that they enjoy. What happens is sometimes that children will go to school, they'll be stuck with a group of children. If they don't get on with them, it's easy to think, well, this is what all children are going to be like. So if you can find them things outside of school or with a different group of children that they can enjoy doing, things that they're passionate about, that will help to build children's confidence. And also explain to them that it's their right to go to school without feeling this harm, and that you're really proud of them, giving them that boost of confidence to know that they should be able to go to school without experiencing bullying. So if your child's bullying others, now this is something that isn't talked about as much, but it does happen. But what's important to remember is that anybody is capable of displaying bullying behaviour. No child is a bully. Children choose to bully, and it can happen to anybody, and there's ways of working. You're not going to be the first parent that this has happened to, so try to stay calm. You've got a really key role in helping your child understand the harm that they might have caused and support them to change their behaviour. It's important to try to not see bullying behaviour as a permanent reflection of their character, but to be clear that behaviour has got to stop. So setting really clear expectations on how children should be treating each other, but not suggesting that it's who they are inherently, or you're a bad person for doing this, but what you're choosing to do is not okay. Try to stay calm and gather all of the facts. Children, especially children who are bullying and feel like they've been found out, need time to be able to express themselves before you can start to get onto the rights and wrongs of things. Make sure your child knows what bullying is and what it isn't. So some of that stuff that we did right at the start, where you're looking at bullying and what that is and the impact of bullying, can be talked about with young people. Make sure that they know that they can talk to you if they're worried about bullying. Sometimes children who are bullying others are displaying bullying behaviour that they've learnt from other people or things that have happened to them. So make sure you find out if that bullying might be in retaliation for bullying that they've personally experienced as well. And then just be really clear and role model the behaviour that you want to see, and show that respectful behaviour to other people, and show them that you don't tolerate disrespectful behaviour. So if your child is being bullied, these are some of the things you can do in relation to school. So we've got lots of logs on our website. Kidscape have a great log, and Contact a Family, Contact have a great log as well on their website, where you can log incidents, keeping a diary of those bullying incidents, when it happened, where it happened, if there were any injuries, anything like that can help you to keep a log of what's happening. Make sure you put your concerns in writing to the school. There are template letters on Contact's website and also on Bullying UK's website. And I think Kidscape also have some too, which will help you to write your formal letter to school that you've experienced, your child's experienced bullying. And then suggest strategies and ideas with your child about what school could do, and make sure you try and come up with some solutions as well. If you want to take a formal complaint about bullying to your child's school, first thing to do is to speak to your child's school and follow their school complaints procedure. So every school has to have a complaints procedure, and most bodies outside of school, when you want to escalate it, won't speak to you unless you've followed the school complaints procedure first. So first thing to do is to speak to your child's teacher or head teacher, and then follow their complaints procedure. Use those letters to write to your child's school about the bullying, request a meeting. And if that bullying hasn't resolved itself, the next steps to take would be to write to the school governing bodies, whether it be an academy trust or it could be the school governors board. Then if you're not still getting the solution that you need, if your school is a maintained school, so not an academy or free school, you would write to your school's local authority. And if your school's an academy chain or free school, you'd write to the Department for Education to make that complaint to school. And finally, you can write to the Secretary of State, especially if your child's school is an academy, to make that complaint too. And again, there are template letters, but what we'd suggest is that if you get to the point where you feel like you need to make a formal complaint, there are routes, which I'll tell you about in a minute, where you can get some support and advice before you do so. 3 tips as well is do not take your child off the school roll. So lots of children who experience really long-term bullying will end up not going to school, or they'll be too sad to go to school, they'll be too frightened to go to school. What's really important is to not take your child off of the school roll, because they won't then be the responsibility of the school anymore. Instead, go to your child's GP and explain what's happening and see if you can get your child signed off and keep a record of all of those things. And finally, don't forget that the school's complaint policy will help you to formulate that complaint. Just to finish, wanted to give you some tips if you're being bullied. So the first one is to tell somebody you trust. There might be some people listening to this who've experienced bullying as adults as well. Keep a record of what's happening. Try not to retaliate because of the reasons that I said before. And surround yourself with people that make you feel good. And the most important thing is do not blame yourself, because it's never your fault if you're experiencing bullying. And finally, to be proud of who you are. And if you're a parent or a young person or an adult that needs support, you can call Childline if you're a young person. If you're experiencing bullying as an adult, you could speak to the Samaritans or another adult you trust. And parents and carers can call Family Lives, and the number's there. But Kidscape also have a helpline, and so do Contact as well. And Contact are trained to support specifically around SEND and bullying too. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of everything related to bullying. I hope it wasn't too much information at this time of day.